The morning sun cast a golden hue over the training base, but nothing about that day felt warm to her. Elise Carter stood near the edge of the runway, clutching a worn duffel bag that carried more of her past than her future. Her eyes, tired but alert, scanned the vast airfield where polished jets gleamed in precise rows. She didn't fit in. Not with her faded boots, not with her thrift store jacket, and certainly not with the heavy silence that followed her like a shadow. It wasn't her first humiliation, but it felt like the worst. She had walked into that elite pilot training camp not as a legacy student or a scholarship genius, but as a single mother whose resume had more gaps than degrees. The other trainees whispered the moment she arrived. Some laughed. One even asked aloud if she was there to clean, not fly. Elise had heard worse before, but this time the laughter pierced deeper. They didn't see the countless nights she stayed awake feeding her baby while memorizing airspace regulations. They didn't know about the part-time jobs, the missed meals, or the debt notices piled beneath her bed. All they saw was a struggling woman who somehow thought she belonged in a world of billion-dollar machines and Top Gun egos. And yet, she showed up, every day, first to arrive, last to leave. She studied harder than anyone else because she had more to prove than anyone else. Her instructors noticed her diligence but never said much. Her peers dismissed her progress as luck. What they didn't know was that Elise had once worked as a technician on decommissioned fighter jets. She knew the pulse of a plane before it even took off, but technical knowledge wasn't enough in a world built on status. When flight simulations began, Elise was always assigned the worst slots: rusty equipment, shorter rotations, outdated software, and when she outperformed others despite the limits, the excuses came fast. That system's old, doesn't count. She probably cheated. She's just lucky. On one particularly cold morning, Elise walked into the briefing room to find her seat missing. Literally. Her chair had been taken and replaced with a sticky note that read, "Wrong flight, lady." She stood frozen for a second, then calmly pulled a chair from the back of the room and took her notes like nothing happened. But inside, something cracked. Not from weakness, but from pressure, the kind that breaks boulders into diamonds. Outside the simulation room, she was Elise the nobody. But inside the cockpit, even a digital one, she became something else. Her reflexes were razor sharp, her spatial awareness uncanny. Her mission completion times broke records quietly, and instructors began to watch her performance feeds in secret. Still, no one acknowledged her in public. Then came the real test. The practical trials with the base's older fleet. Pilots were chosen randomly to pair with live aircraft. Elise, of course, was passed over. "She's not ready," someone said. "She'd crash it." Even the new cadets snickered behind her back. That night, Elise sat outside the dorm with a picture of her son, Leo, barely 2 years old. "I'll fly for you," she whispered. Her break didn't come in a meeting or a favor. It came in chaos. A visiting squadron had arrived, bringing with them a fleet of advanced aircraft for a special military exhibition. Among them, a Rafale fighter jet, sleek, deadly, beautiful. Only senior flight captains were authorized to interact with it, let alone fly it. But on that fateful afternoon, as the aircraft was being towed into position, something went wrong. A malfunction in the tow system caused the aircraft to lurch, spin slightly, and stall across the runway's edge. The systems jammed. The pilot was nowhere nearby. A frantic call for ground support echoed through the comms. No one responded. Everyone froze. Everyone except Elise. In one swift, instinctive move, she sprinted toward the Rafale. Most thought she was crazy. Some shouted for her to stop. But Elise had already climbed into the cockpit, her hands dancing across controls like a symphony she had played all her life. She didn't hesitate. She didn't panic. She reset the circuit. She recalibrated the throttle manually. She disengaged the faulty tow lock. And when the airfield command shouted for someone to just taxi the plane back manually, Elise did more than that. She flew. With a roar that silenced the entire base, the Rafale lifted from the ground and cut through the sky like a blade of light. For 5 minutes, Elise controlled one of the world's most advanced jets. Her flight was precise, graceful, fierce, a solo maneuver that left instructors speechless, senior officers frozen, and cadets too stunned to speak. By the time she landed, a crowd had gathered, not with ridicule, but with reverence. They no longer laughed, but for Elise the only sound that mattered was the quiet, proud voice in her head whispering, "For Leo." The airfield hadn't returned to normal after Elise landed. Something invisible had shifted, something heavier than jet fuel and louder than afterburners. For weeks, she had existed on the edges, a background blur in other people's ambitions. But now, every eye turned to her as she stepped out of the Rafale with grease on her fingers and pride in her posture. No one dared mock her now, not after watching her command the sky like it had been waiting just for her. The base commander, a decorated veteran named Colonel Whitaker, had seen thousands of pilots in his time, some gifted, others arrogant. But this woman, this single mother who wasn't even on the roster for live trials, had just flown a Rafale with the composure of a born ace. He didn't call her into his office. He came to her. Standing in front of the assembled cadets, Whitaker pointed not to the sky, but to her. "That," he said without ceremony, "is what we call instinct married to excellence." For Elise, it wasn't praise that mattered. It was the shift in the room. People who had once turned their backs now looked her in the eyes. Not all kindly, but no longer dismissively, but success didn't wash away hardship. When Elise returned to her room that night, she didn't celebrate. She picked up her cracked phone and FaceTimed her son. Leo's babysitter held the toddler up to the screen, and Elise's exhaustion melted in his giggles. She didn't tell him she'd flown a Rafale. She just asked if he'd eaten, if he'd been good, and if he missed her. He said yes to everything, and blew her a kiss. By morning, the video of her unexpected Rafale flight had circulated through internal military networks. By noon, it had leaked. A grainy clip shot by a ground mechanic made its way to the internet. Within hours, the clip was viral. Headlines asked who the mystery woman was. Some commenters speculated she was an officer in disguise. Others thought it was a simulation trick. Only a few knew the truth. She was a single mother with unpaid bills, too many rejection letters, and a will forged in fire. With the world suddenly curious, Elise was pulled into more tests. This time, they didn't sideline her. She was put through every challenge, every high-G maneuver, every emergency drill, and she kept showing up. Not for glory, but for the little boy who didn't yet understand why his mother had to fight so hard to matter. Still, not everyone applauded her rise. A group of elite cadets, mostly children of military brass and private donors, started pushing back. Not openly, but with subtle sabotage. One erased her data logs, another tried to tamper with her assigned gear. Elise reported nothing. She adjusted, double-checked everything, and let her results speak. One day, during a high-pressure formation flight, the lead pilot of her group intentionally fed Elise bad coordinates. If she had followed them, she would have veered dangerously close to a restricted zone. Instead, Elise trusted her training and recalculated mid-flight. Her correction saved the mission and embarrassed the one who had tried to set her up. Word reached higher circles, and then an invitation came. The Air Force had selected a few pilots to participate in a classified joint training exercise involving live Rafales and strategic drone coordination. Only 5 trainees were chosen. Elise was one of them. She almost didn't believe the email. She stared at it in silence, hands trembling, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of vindication. Before the drill began, the pilots gathered in briefing halls where maps and orders were discussed. Elise listened carefully, took notes, asked sharp questions. Her peers gave her space now. Not respect, not friendship, but space. As if unsure what to make of the woman who had crossed a class divide in a single flight. On the day of the exercise, Elise stood in her flight suit by the Rafale again, the same aircraft that had first become her voice. This time, it wasn't an accident. It was her mission. As she climbed into the cockpit, a voice in her headset crackled. "Eyes are on you, Carter. Make it count." But she wasn't thinking of the brass or the peers watching from control towers. She was thinking of a promise whispered through tears one night, back when her bank account was empty and her dream barely breathing. "I'll find a way," she had said to Leo. "Even if no one opens the door, I'll fly through the window." So she did. Her Rafale soared into the sky, not as an intruder, but as a leader. The air split around her with purpose. She guided. The drone team flawlessly communicated with clarity and adapted mid-mission when weather patterns shifted. Every turn she made, every second she shaved off the operation time, proved that she wasn't just good, she was undeniable. And by the end of the drill, as she touched down and stepped out into the evening light, no one could deny it anymore. Elise. Carter wasn't the woman they had laughed at. She was the woman they now saluted. The morning after the drill, Elise awoke not to silence but to a knock on her door. A soft, hesitant sound, like respect finally learning how to introduce itself. When she opened it, a junior cadet stood there with wide eyes and a small envelope. No words were exchanged. Just a slight nod before the cadet turned and walked away. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter. It bore the Air Force insignia and a message short enough to feel unreal. "Report to Command Hall 2 at 1600 hours. Dress uniform required. You've earned it." That was it. No explanation. But Elise understood. The mission had reached farther than the skies. It had reached the heart of the system. For most cadets, recognition came with a trail of privilege. For Elise, every step was a battle, every nod a rare currency. She stared at the dress uniform folded neatly at the bottom of her locker, one she never thought she'd wear for anything but graduation, if she made it that far, but today she wore it for something else. Command Hall 2 was buzzing by the time she arrived, not just with instructors but with top-level military officials, base personnel, and civilian observers from aviation tech companies. A large screen projected her flight path from the Rafale exercise, annotated with expert comments and statistics that told a silent story of precision and leadership. But Elise didn't look at the screen. She stood near the back, humble, composed, eyes quietly scanning the crowd. Then came the moment. Colonel Whitaker took the stage and began to speak. Not about combat, not about legacy, but about grit. He spoke of a woman who had been underestimated, overlooked and obstructed, yet kept rising. He didn't say her name right away. Instead, he told a story, a true one, of a single mom who once stood outside the camp gates unsure if she'd even be allowed in. Then he turned, faced the audience, and said, "Elise Carter, please step forward." The room, stunned into silence, watched her walk through the aisle not with swagger, but with weightless grace. The applause was not loud. It was slow, steady, and laced with awe. She stood before the colonel as he clipped a silver medal onto her uniform, an award rarely given to cadets, reserved only for acts that redefined leadership under stress. After the ceremony, people came to her, one by one, some to congratulate, some to apologize, some just to say they had seen her fly and would never forget it. But Elise didn't need their words. Her mind was already somewhere else, on the video call later that night with her son. That would be the real celebration. Days passed. The base shifted. Suddenly, Elise's name was used as an example. Young cadets referenced her strategies. Instructors requested her feedback. Recruiters whispered about fast-tracking her to officer school, One defense contractor even asked if she would consider working with a civilian test flight program. But while the world finally tried to catch up with her, Elise never chased the spotlight. Her routines stayed the same. Early mornings, long runs, flight simulations, quiet study sessions. If anything had changed, it was how she held herself now. Not with defiance, but with earned calm. Still, not all were pleased. The same elite cadets, who once mocked her, now faced the embarrassment of their own mediocrity. One in particular, Brandon Geller, son of a retired general, had watched Elise rise past him in rank and regard. He couldn't stomach it, and so he plotted to make her stumble again. During a maintenance check for an upcoming group mission, Brandon tampered with the secondary navigation module in Elise's assigned aircraft, a move designed to disorient her mid-flight, force a minor error, and humiliate her. He believed she wouldn't catch it. He was wrong. Elise had always double-checked her systems, more from habit than paranoia. She caught the anomaly in the code and reported it without fanfare. The incident launched a quiet investigation. Evidence was found. Brandon was expelled silently 2 weeks later. Elise never said a word to anyone about it, but the event reminded her that elevation didn't erase envy. It made her stronger. Soon, a message came from Air Command. Elise had been shortlisted for an elite test program, piloting Next Generation, aircraft in top-secret missions, both domestic and international. It wasn't just a promotion. It was an invitation to rewrite the future of aviation. Her story was being watched far beyond the camp now. Journalists dug into her past, some with sympathy, others with scrutiny. They discovered the eviction notices, the minimum wage jobs, the hospital records from her son's premature birth. They tried to craft a scandal or a savior tale. Elise gave them neither. She issued one statement only: "I fly because I can, and because I must." And the world listened. The tarmac shimmered under the late afternoon sun, a mirage of heat and destiny. Elise Carter stood beside a sleek, matte-black experimental aircraft, an angular marvel built for speeds no human mind should control. She had been selected as one of only 2 test pilots in the country to fly it, not because of favors, not because of background, but because her instincts had done what algorithms couldn't. The flight was set to be streamed privately to military, tech councils across the globe, France, India, the United States, all watching a single mother from a broken neighborhood mount a machine worth more than anything she'd ever seen. She wasn't just flying today. She was representing every woman, every parent, every soul told they weren't enough. Before boarding, Elise took one long breath. She didn't pray. She didn't panic. She simply thought of Leo, asleep at home, and whispered, "Watch me." She took off like thunder. The plane sliced through the sky like poetry in motion. Every twist, every ascent, every high G dive was a signature in the air. As observers watched, jaws dropped. This wasn't training. This wasn't a fluke. This was mastery. Mid-flight, Command issued a curveball, an impromptu evasive maneuver test through mountain canyons at near-supersonic speeds. It was a stunt designed to expose fear or ego. Elise showed neither. She adjusted within seconds, cutting through the sky like it was muscle memory from a lifetime she hadn't lived yet. On the ground, silence fell over war rooms. Even skeptics leaned forward. Somewhere in the viewing center, a female cadet whispered, "She's rewriting the manual." When Elise landed, she didn't raise her arms in triumph. She just removed her helmet, sweat clinging to her hairline, and stared at the horizon like it was still calling her. The debriefing wasn't immediate. She was told to rest, but instead, she returned to her quarters, dialed her babysitter, and asked to speak to Leo. His tiny voice said, "Did you fly today?" She smiled. "Yes, I flew higher than ever." What she didn't know was that the feed of her flight had been leaked. Not illegally, but strategically. Someone in the command, Center believed the world needed to see her. The story of a single mom who once walked into a pilot camp and was mocked, only to land a Rafale, silence a nation, and rise through classified ranks faster than anyone in recent history. The internet exploded. Military publications hailed her as the mind behind the machine. Civilian headlines read, "Single Mom to Sky Queen." Others called her the real Top Gun, but Elise ignored the noise. She still ate lunch alone, still ran at dawn, still packed Leo's favorite snacks on weekends. Glory hadn't changed her, but it had changed the system around her. 3 months later, at a global defense conference in Brussels, she was invited as the keynote speaker, a role never before given to a test pilot. As she walked on stage in full uniform, flashes of cameras lit the room like a sky full of stars. She looked out not for applause, but for awareness, and in her speech, she didn't talk about planes. She talked about doors. Doors slammed in her face. Doors guarded by status. Doors she had learned to pick, pry, or fly over, and how every locked door was worth fighting, because behind one of them, her future had been waiting. By the time she stepped off the stage, she wasn't just a pilot. She was a symbol, and the cadets back at the base, they no longer laughed. They read her manuals, trained under her methods, and hung her picture in the briefing room, where once there had been only portraits of men. Elise Carter never needed their permission. She only needed the sky. And now, the sky bore her name.